She collapsed beside the water trough like something thrown away. Mud caked her feet, blood soaked through the torn fabric at her shoulders, and her breath came in shallow, desperate gulps. Rhett Callahan stood on his porch with a rifle across his arm, staring down at the girl who'd just ruined his quiet morning. He didn't help strangers. He didn't trust women who appeared out of nowhere. But when her eyes opened and locked onto his, wild, terrified, and still fighting, he made a choice that would crack open the life he'd been hiding inside for years. He didn't save her. He trapped her, and neither of them saw it coming. If you want to see how a broken woman and a lonely rancher survive each other, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet, but Rhett Callahan was already awake. He stood on the sagging porch of his ranch house, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The land stretched out in front of him, brown, endless, and empty. It used to feel like freedom. Now it just felt like silence. He heard the dogs first, a low growl, then barking. Rhett set the cup down and picked up the rifle leaning against the doorframe. He didn't get visitors this far out, and when he did, they weren't the kind you invited inside. The girl was face down beside the water trough when he found her. For a second he thought she was dead. Her dress, if you could call it that, was shredded at the hem and stained with dirt and something darker. Her feet were bare, torn up like she'd walked through glass. One arm was stretched out toward the water, fingers still curled like she'd been reaching for it when she fell. Rhett stood there, rifle lowered, staring. He didn't move to help, he just watched. Then her chest rose, a shallow, rattling breath. "Damn it," he muttered. He crouched down beside her, keeping the rifle within reach. Up close she looked worse. Bruises along her jaw, cuts on her arms. Her hair was matted with sweat and dust, tangled so bad it looked like it hadn't been brushed in weeks. She was young, maybe 20, maybe younger. Hard to tell under all the damage. Rhett reached out and pressed 2 fingers against her neck. Her pulse was faint, but it was there. "Hey," he said, not gently. "You alive?" Her eyes snapped open. They were green, bright, sharp green like broken glass. And they were afraid. She jerked back, scrambling away from him, her hands clawing at the dirt. A sound came out of her throat, half gasp, half scream, and she pressed herself against the side of the trough like a cornered animal. Rhett stood up slowly, holding his hands out. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't believe him. That much was clear. "You on my land," he said flatly. "You collapse on my property, you're my problem. So you got 2 choices. You can sit there and die, or you can let me get you inside." Her breathing was fast, uneven. Her eyes darted past him, scanning the horizon like she was looking for someone. "No one's coming," Rhett said. "It's just me out here." That didn't seem to comfort her. He sighed and turned toward the house. "Rosa," he called, "get out here." A moment later, the door swung open and a squat, gray-haired woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Rosa had been his housekeeper for 10 years. She didn't ask questions, didn't gossip, and didn't put up with his moods. She took one look at the girl by the trough and shook her head. "Another stray?" Rosa said. "She's hurt," Rhett said. "She's trouble." "Probably." Rosa sighed and came down the steps. She knelt beside the girl, gentler than Rhett had been, and brushed the hair out of her face. "What's your name, child?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared at Rosa with those wide, unblinking eyes. "She talk?" Rosa asked. "Don't know yet." Rosa stood and crossed her arms. "You planning to drag her inside, or you want me to do it?" "I'll do it," Rhett said. He stepped forward and the girl flinched so hard she hit her head against the trough. He stopped. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said again, slower this time. "But you need water, food, a bed, and you're not getting any of that out here." She stared at him, then finally she nodded. Rhett reached down and slid one arm under her shoulders, the other under her knees. She was lighter than he expected. Too light. He carried her toward the house, and Rosa followed, muttering something in Spanish that he didn't catch. Inside, the air was cooler. The house was simple. Wood floors, stone fireplace, a kitchen table that had seen better days. Rhett set the girl down on the couch near the window, and she immediately pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "Get her some water," Rhett said, "and something to eat. Bread, maybe. Nothing heavy." Rosa nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Rhett stood there, looking down at the girl. She wouldn't meet his eyes now, just stared at the floor, rocking slightly. "You got a name?" he asked. Silence. "You run away from someone?" Her jaw tightened. "You kill someone?" Her head snapped up, and for the first time she looked angry instead of afraid. "No," she said. Her voice was hoarse, cracked from thirst, but steady. "I didn't." "Good," Rhett said, "because I don't need that kind of trouble." Rosa came back with a tin cup and a plate of bread. She set them on the table beside the couch. "Drink slow," she said, "or you'll make yourself sick." The girl reached for the cup with shaking hands. She drank, and water spilled down her chin, but she didn't stop until the cup was empty. Rhett watched her. "You got people looking for you?" She set the cup down. Her hands were still shaking. "Maybe." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Rhett rubbed the back of his neck. This was a bad idea. He knew it was a bad idea, but he'd already brought her inside, and Rosa was already pulling out bandages from the cabinet, and the girl was already looking at him like he was the first person in a long time who hadn't tried to kill her. "You can stay," he said finally. "One night, maybe two. But you work. You eat my food. You sleep under my roof. You earn it. Understood?" She nodded. "And if someone shows up looking for you, I'm not lying for you. I'm not dying for you. You got that?" "Yes." "Good." He turned toward the door. "Rosa will clean you up. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do with you." He walked out before she could say anything else. By the time the sun came up the next morning, Rhett had already decided he didn't like her. It wasn't personal. He didn't like most people. But this girl, whoever she was, had brought something into his house that he didn't want. She'd brought questions, worry, the possibility that someone dangerous might come knocking. He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee Rosa must have given her. She looked better, cleaner at least. Her hair was still tangled, but someone had tried to comb it. The cuts on her arms were bandaged. She was wearing one of Rosa's old dresses, too big in the shoulders, too short at the hem. She looked up when he walked in, and for a second, neither of them said anything. "You sleep?" Rhett asked. "No," figured. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "You got a name yet, or am I supposed to keep calling you girl?" She hesitated. Then, "Ophelia." "Ophelia," he repeated. "That's a hell of a name." "It was my mother's idea." "She's still around?" "No." Rhett nodded. He didn't push. "You know how to work?" "Depends on the work. Feeding chickens, hauling water, fixing fence posts, nothing fancy." "I can do that." "Good, because I meant what I said yesterday. You don't work, you don't stay." Ophelia set her cup down. "I'll work." "Then get your boots on. We start in 10 minutes. She didn't have boots. Rosa found her an old pair that didn't fit right, but Ophelia didn't complain. She laced them up, pulled her hair back, and followed Rhett outside. The ranch wasn't much to look at. A house, a barn, a chicken coop, a corral with a few horses. The land went on forever, but most of it was just scrub and dust. Rhett had 6 men working for him, all of them older, all of them tired. They looked at Ophelia like she was a ghost. "This is Ophelia," Rhett said to the nearest man, a grizzled guy named Dutch. "She's helping out for a few days. You got a problem with that? You talk to me." Dutch looked her up and down. "She know anything about horses?" "Don't know yet." Dutch grunted and walked off. Rhett handed Ophelia a bucket. "Chicken coops over there. Feed them, collect the eggs. Don't let them peck you to death. Think you can handle that?" "Yes." "Good. I'll be in the barn if you need me, which you won't." He left her there. Ophelia stood in the middle of the yard holding the bucket, staring at the chickens like they might explode. Then she took a breath and got to work. Oh, she was good at being invisible. Rhett noticed that over the next few days. Ophelia didn't talk unless someone asked her a question. She didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, didn't make a sound when she worked. She moved through the ranch like a shadow, there but not there, present but not seen. It unnerved him. On the 3rd morning, he found her standing outside the corral, staring at the black stallion in the far corner. Phantom. The horse was a monster. 17 hands, jet black, wild as hell, Rhett had bought him off a trader 2 years ago, thinking he could break him. He'd been wrong. Phantom had thrown every man who tried to ride him, kicked in 2 fence posts, and once nearly trampled Dutch to death. Rhett kept him out of sentiment and stupidity, but he didn't go near him anymore. Ophelia was leaning on the fence, watching the horse like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. "Don't get any ideas," Rhett said, walking up beside her. She didn't flinch, didn't even look at him. "What's his name?" "Phantom." "Has anyone ridden him?" "No, and no one's going to." "Why not?" "Because he's mean and dangerous, and he'd rather kill you than let you on his back." Ophelia tilted her head. "He's scared." Rhett laughed. "That horse isn't scared of anything." "Yes, he is," she pointed. "Look at his ears, the way he's standing. He's not angry, he's terrified." Rhett looked at the horse, then at her. "You know horses?" "I know fear." He didn't know what to say to that. Ophelia pushed off the fence and walked away, leaving him standing there alone. Eat match. That night, Rhett sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for no particular reason. The stars were out, sharp and cold, and the wind carried the smell of dust and animal sweat. Rosa came out and sat beside him. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, "You planning to keep her?" "No." "You sure about that?" "She'll leave when she's ready. And if someone comes looking for her, then I'll deal with it." Rosa shook her head. "You're a fool, Rhett Callahan." "Yeah," he said. "I know." Inside the house, through the window, he could see Ophelia sitting at the kitchen table. She was sewing something, probably fixing the dress Rosa had given her. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, like she was afraid of making a mistake. Rhett took another drink and looked away. He didn't save people. He didn't get involved. He'd learned that lesson years ago, and he'd learned it the hard way. But when he looked at Ophelia, he saw something he recognized. He saw someone who'd been running for so long they'd forgotten how to stop. And maybe, just maybe, he saw a little bit of himself. By the end of the first week, Ophelia had become part of the ranch. She wasn't loud about it. She didn't demand space or attention. She just fit. She fed the chickens every morning, hauled water without being asked, and fixed a section of fence that had been broken for months. The men stopped staring at her. They started nodding when she passed. Rhett tried not to notice, but he did. He noticed the way she moved, quiet, efficient, always looking over her shoulder. He noticed the way she flinched when someone raised their voice, even if they weren't yelling at her. He noticed the way she stood outside Phantom's corral every evening, watching the horse like she was waiting for something. On the 8th day, she finally spoke to him without being prompted. "I want to work with him," she said. Rhett was mucking out a stall. He stopped and looked at her. "Work with who?" "Phantom." "No." "Why not?" "Because he'll kill you." "He won't." Rhett leaned on the shovel. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." "Ophelia." "I know horses," she said, and there was an edge to her voice now. "I know what it looks like when something's been hurt, and I know how to fix it." Rhett stared at her. "You can't fix a horse like that." "Maybe not, but I can try." He wanted to say no. He should have said no, but he didn't. "Fine," he said, "but if he throws you, don't come crying to me." Ophelia nodded and walked toward the corral. Rhett followed, even though he told himself he wouldn't. Phantom was at the far end, head down, ears pinned back. The second Ophelia stepped into the corral, the horse's head shot up. He snorted, stamped, and moved toward her like he was going to charge. Rhett's hand went to the fence. "Ophelia!" But she didn't run. She stood perfectly still, hands at her sides, and waited. The horse stopped 10 feet away, nostrils flaring. He pawed at the ground, tossing his head. Ophelia didn't move. The horse took a step forward, then another. Rhett held his breath. Phantom stopped right in front of her. He snorted again, loud and wet, and lowered his head. Ophelia lifted one hand, slow, careful, and placed it on the horse's nose. Phantom didn't move. Neither did she. They stood there like that, the girl and the horse, both of them still and silent and afraid. And for the first time in 2 years, Rhett Callahan felt something crack open inside his chest. Paz. That night, Dutch cornered him in the barn. You letting her work with that horse? Yeah, that's a bad idea. Probably. Dutch crossed his arms. You know people are going to talk, right? Girl shows up out of nowhere, you let her stay, now she's training your horses? They're going to think, I don't care what they think. You should. Rhett turned to face him. She's helping, that's all. If you got a problem with it, say it now. Dutch stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. You're changing, Rhett. Don't know if it's good or bad yet, but you're changing. He walked out, leaving Rhett alone in the dark. Rhett stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. Maybe Dutch was right. Maybe he was changing. But he didn't think it was because of Ophelia. He thought it was because, for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. The next morning, Rhett left a cup of coffee on the porch railing before sunrise. He didn't say anything, didn't wait to see if she took it. But when he came back an hour later, the cup was empty. And Ophelia was standing in the corral again, one hand on Phantom's neck, whispering something Rhett couldn't hear. He watched from the barn, hidden in the shadows, and told himself it didn't mean anything. But he kept watching anyway. By the end of the second week, Phantom let Ophelia brush him. It didn't happen all at once. It started with her standing near the fence, close enough that he could see her, but far enough that he didn't feel cornered. Then she'd step inside the corral and wait. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. She never rushed him, never forced it. She just stood there, still and patient, until the horse decided to come closer. Rhett watched from the barn most mornings, pretending he had work to do. He told himself he was keeping an eye on things in case the horse turned violent. But that wasn't the truth, and he knew it. The truth was, he couldn't look away. On the 15th day, Ophelia walked into the corral with a brush in her hand. Phantom's ears flicked forward. He watched her, tense, ready to bolt. She stopped halfway across the dirt and held the brush up, letting him see it. Just this, she said softly. Nothing else. The horse snorted and turned his head, but he didn't move away. Ophelia took another step, then another. When she was close enough to touch him, she reached out slowly and placed her palm flat against his shoulder. Phantom's muscles twitched under her hand, but he stayed put. She lifted the brush and ran it down his neck in one long, careful stroke. The horse stood still. Rhett exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. Dutch walked up beside him, arms crossed. I'll be damned. Yeah, Rhett said. That girl's got something. Yeah, Dutch glanced at him. You gonna let her keep doing this? Don't see why not. People are already talking, Rhett. You know that, right? Let them talk. Dutch shook his head and walked off, muttering something about stubborn men and bad decisions. Rhett stayed where he was, watching Ophelia brush the horse that no one else could touch. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like she was handling something precious. Phantom's eyes were half closed now, his head lowered. He looked calm, almost peaceful. Rhett didn't know how she'd done it, but he was starting to think maybe she wasn't just good with horses. Maybe she understood broken things. Bersunk. That afternoon, Rhett found her sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the horizon. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from work. The other kind. He sat down beside her without asking. For a while, neither of them spoke. You ever going to tell me what you're running from? Rhett asked finally. Ophelia didn't look at him. Does it matter? Might. Why? Because if someone shows up here looking for you, I need to know what I'm dealing with. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I was married. Rhett waited. His name was Silas, she continued, her voice flat. I was 17 when I met him, 18 when I married him. I thought he was kind. I thought he loved me. She paused. I was wrong. Rhett didn't say anything. He just listened. He didn't hit me at first, Ophelia said. It started small. He'd get angry if I talked to other men, if I left the house without telling him, if I smiled too much. Her hands tightened in her lap. Then one day, I didn't smile enough, and he broke my arm. Rhett's jaw tightened, but he kept his mouth shut. I stayed for 2 years, Ophelia said. I kept thinking it would get better, that he'd change. But he didn't. He got worse. She finally looked at Rhett, and her eyes were hard. So I left. I waited until he was drunk, and I ran. I've been running ever since. How long ago? 3 months, maybe 4. I don't know anymore. Rhett leaned back against the step. You know you're here? I don't think so, but he's looking. I know he is. What happens if he finds you? Ophelia's expression didn't change. He'll kill me, or drag me back. Either way, I lose. Rhett looked at her for a long time. Then he said, He comes here, he'll have to go through me first. Ophelia blinked. Why would you do that? Because you're on my land. That makes you my responsibility. That's not a good reason. It's the only one I've got. She studied him, like she was trying to figure out if he was lying. Then she shook her head. You don't owe me anything, Rhett. Didn't say I did. Then why? Because I want to, he said, and his voice was rougher than he meant it to be. That good enough for you? Ophelia stared at him. Then slowly, she nodded. They sat there in silence, the sun sinking lower, the air cooling around them. Somewhere in the distance, Phantom whinnied. Rhett stood and brushed the dust off his pants. Come on, Rosa's making dinner, and if we're late, she'll feed it to the dogs. Ophelia stood too, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she almost smiled. The men didn't trust her. Rhett could see it in the way they looked at her when she passed. Dutch was fine. He mostly kept to himself. But the younger ones, the drifters who worked for a season and moved on, they whispered when they thought no one was listening. One of them, a wiry kid named Cole, finally said something out loud. It was mid-morning, and Ophelia was carrying a bucket of water from the well. Cole was leaning against the barn, chewing tobacco, watching her with narrowed eyes. She always this quiet? He asked Dutch. Dutch didn't look up from the saddle he was fixing. Yep. Seems strange. Girl just shows up, don't talk, don't explain herself. You ask me, she's hiding something. Good thing nobody asked you, Dutch said. Cole spat into the dirt. I'm just saying, boss is making a mistake. Letting some stray stay here? That's how you get robbed, or worse. Then take it up with the boss, Dutch said flatly. But I'd keep your mouth shut if I were you. Cole muttered something under his breath and walked off. Ophelia had heard the whole thing. Rhett saw it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way she kept her head down as she passed the barn. But she didn't say anything. She just kept walking. Rhett stepped out from the shadows where he'd been standing. Dutch glanced at him. You hear that? Rhett asked. Yep. You think I'm making a mistake? Dutch set the saddle down and looked him in the eye. I think you're doing what you think is right. Whether that's a mistake or not, we'll find out soon enough. Rhett nodded and walked toward the house. Inside, Rosa was kneading dough at the kitchen table. She looked up when he came in. You look like you want to hit something. Cole's running his mouth. Cole's an idiot. He's not the only one thinking it. Rosa wiped her hands on her apron. So what are you going to do? Fire him? Run her off? Or are you going to stand by what you said and deal with whatever comes? Rhett didn't answer. Rosa sighed. That girl's got no one, Rhett. You throw her out now, she's dead in a week. Maybe less. I know that. Then stop acting like this is complicated. It's not. You already made your choice. Now you live with it. She went back to kneading, and Rhett walked out onto the porch. Ophelia was in the corral again, standing beside Phantom. The horse's head was resting on her shoulder, and she was running her hand down his neck, whispering something Rhett couldn't hear. He leaned against the railing and watched. He'd made his choice. Now he had to figure out what it cost. Unchecked. That night, Rhett couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. His mind wouldn't shut off. He kept thinking about Ophelia's voice when she told him about her husband, the flatness of it. Like she'd told the story so many times, it didn't hurt anymore. But he knew that wasn't true. He got up, pulled on his pants and boots, and walked outside. The porch was empty, but there was a light on in the barn. Rhett frowned and headed toward it. Inside, Ophelia was sitting on a hay bale, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring at nothing. She looked up when he walked in, and for a second she looked guilty, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Couldn't sleep? Rhett asked. No. Yeah, me neither. He sat down on the bale across from her. For a while they just sat there in silence, the only sound the soft rustling of the horses in their stalls. I'm sorry, Ophelia said quietly. Rhett looked at her. For what? For bringing trouble here, for making things harder. You didn't make anything harder. Yes, I did. Your men don't trust me. People are talking. And if Silas shows up, he won't. You don't know that. No, Rhett said, but I'm not going to spend every day worrying about it. And neither should you. Ophelia shook her head. You don't understand. He's not the kind of man who gives up. If he thinks I'm here, he'll come. And when he does, then I'll handle it. Why? Her voice cracked. Why do you care? Rhett didn't answer right away. He didn't know how to explain it. Didn't know if he could. Because you remind me of someone, he said finally. Who? Me. Ophelia looked at him, confused. Rhett stood and walked to the barn door, staring out at the dark prairie. I lost people, he said, a long time ago. My wife, my daughter. They got sick and I couldn't save them. I tried everything, brought in doctors, spent money I didn't have, but it didn't matter. They died anyway. Ophelia didn't say anything. After that, I shut down, Rhett continued. I stopped talking to people, stopped caring. I figured if I didn't let anyone close, I wouldn't have to lose them. He turned to look at her. But you can't live like that forever. Eventually, you just stop living. So what changed? Ophelia asked. Rhett gave her a faint, bitter smile. You did. Her eyes widened. I'm not saying I'm fixed, Rhett said. I'm not. But for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm drowning. He paused. So yeah, I care. Maybe that makes me a fool. But I'd rather be a fool than dead inside. Ophelia looked down at her hands. I don't know how to stop running. Then don't, Rhett said, but at least stop running alone. She looked up at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not gratitude, not relief, just recognition. Like she finally understood what he was offering. Okay, she said softly. Rhett nodded and walked back toward the house, leaving her alone in the barn. But when he glanced back, she was still sitting there, her head tilted up toward the rafters, like she was trying to remember what it felt like to breathe. The next morning, everything changed. Rhett was in the barn, checking on one of the mares, when he heard shouting outside. He walked out to find Dutch and Cole arguing near the corral. What's going on? Rhett asked. Cole pointed at Phantom. She's trying to ride him. Rhett's head snapped toward the corral. Sure enough, Ophelia was standing beside the stallion, one hand on his neck, the other holding a saddle. She's going to get herself killed, Cole said. Rhett didn't answer. He just walked toward the fence. Ophelia saw him coming. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't tell me not to do this. I wasn't going to. She blinked. You weren't? No. Rhett leaned against the fence. But if you're going to do it right. Don't rush him. Ophelia stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and turned back to the horse. By now, half the ranch had gathered around the corral. Dutch, Cole, Rosa, and a handful of other men, all watching in silence. Ophelia lifted the saddle slowly and placed it on Phantom's back. The horse shifted, ears pinned back, but he didn't bolt. She tightened the straps, talking to him the whole time in that low, steady voice she used. Then she stepped around to his side and gripped the saddle horn. Easy, she whispered. Easy. She put one foot in the stirrup and swung herself up. Phantom's whole body tensed. For a second, nothing happened. Then the horse exploded. He bucked hard, twisting in midair, and Ophelia's hands flew to the reins. She held on, her knees locked tight against his sides, her body moving with his instead of against him. Phantom bucked again. And again. He spun, kicked, and threw himself sideways, trying to shake her off, but she didn't let go. Come on, Rhett muttered under his breath. Come on, girl. Phantom reared up, hooves slashing at the air, and for a horrible second, Rhett thought she was going to fall. But she leaned forward, pressing herself against the horse's neck, and when Phantom came down, she was still there. The horse stood still, sides heaving, sweat dripping down his flanks. Ophelia sat up slowly. She was breathing hard, her face pale, but she was smiling. Good boy, she said, and she patted Phantom's neck. The ranch was dead silent. Then Dutch started clapping. One by one, the others joined in. Even Cole, though he looked like it physically hurt him to do it. Rhett didn't clap. He just stood there, staring at the girl on the horse that no one else could ride, and he felt something crack open inside him that he didn't know how to name. Ophelia dismounted and led Phantom toward the gate. When she passed Rhett, she looked at him, and her smile widened. "Told you he wasn't mean," she said. Rhett shook his head, but he was smiling too. "Yeah, you did." Ta-da! After that, everything shifted. The men stopped whispering. They started nodding when Ophelia walked by. Cole didn't say another word about her. Dutch started asking her for help with the other horses. And Rhett started leaving her coffee every morning. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just set the cup on the porch railing before she woke up, and by the time she came outside, he'd be gone. But she always drank it. One morning, she caught him. He was walking back from the barn when she stepped out onto the porch, cup in hand. She looked at him, then at the coffee, then back at him. "Thank you," she said. Rhett shrugged. "It's just coffee." "No," Ophelia said. "It's not." She took a sip and walked past him toward the corral, and Rhett stood there, watching her go, wondering when exactly she'd stopped being a stranger. By the fourth week, Ophelia was part of the ranch in a way that felt permanent. She trained Phantom every morning, worked alongside the men in the afternoons, and ate dinner with Rosa and Rhett every night. She still didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Rhett found himself looking for her without meaning to. When she wasn't in the corral, he'd glance toward the barn. When she wasn't in the barn, he'd check the house. It wasn't worry exactly. It was just awareness. He knew where she was, and it mattered. One evening, after dinner, Ophelia stayed on the porch while Rosa went inside to clean up. Rhett sat down beside her, and they watched the sun sink below the hills. "You're good with him," Rhett said. "With who?" "Phantom." Ophelia smiled faintly. "He's not that hard to understand. Most people think he's impossible. Most people don't listen." Rhett glanced at her. "You always this wise?" "No," she said. "I just know what it's like to be scared and angry and alone." Rhett didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. They sat there in comfortable silence until the stars came out, and for the first time in years, Rhett didn't feel like he was sitting alone. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. The trouble started small. A rider came through town asking questions about a woman who fit Ophelia's description, then another, then a third. Dutch heard about it from a shopkeeper and brought the news back to the ranch. "Someone's looking for her," Dutch said, standing in Rhett's office. "And they're not being quiet about it." Rhett's hands tightened on the edge of his desk. "How many?" "3 so far. Maybe more. They say who they're working for?" "No, but one of them mentioned a name, Silas." Rhett stood up. "Where's Ophelia?" "In the barn." Rhett walked out without another word. He found her brushing Phantom, humming softly to herself. She looked up when he came in, and her smile faded when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Someone's looking for you." The brush slipped from her hand and hit the ground. "They're asking around town," Rhett said. "Describing you, using your husband's name." Ophelia's face went white. "How many?" "3. Maybe more." She took a step back, her breathing quickening. "I have to leave." "No." "Rhett, if he's here, then we deal with it." "You don't understand," Ophelia said, her voice rising. "He won't stop. He'll burn this place down if he has to. He'll hurt you. He'll hurt everyone here." "Let him try." "Rhett!" "I'm not letting you run," Rhett said, and his voice was hard now. "Not again. You stay here. You stay with me. And if he shows up, we'll handle it together." Ophelia stared at him, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm done losing people," Rhett said. "And I'm not losing you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. Ophelia looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, just once. "Okay," she whispered. Rhett turned and walked out of the barn, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know if he could protect her, but he was damn sure going to try. The riders came 2 days later. Rhett saw them from the porch. 3 men on horseback, moving slowly up the road that cut through his land. They weren't in a hurry. That was the first thing that bothered him. Men in a hurry had purpose. Men who took their time had confidence. He set his coffee down and walked inside. "Rosa, get Ophelia. Tell her to stay in the house." Rosa looked up from the stove, saw his face, and didn't ask questions. She wiped her hands on her apron and disappeared down the hall. Rhett grabbed his rifle from above the door and stepped back onto the porch. Dutch was already walking up from the barn, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "You see them?" Dutch asked. "Yeah." "Think it's him?" "Don't know yet." The riders stopped at the gate. The one in front was tall, lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. He wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes swept over the ranch like he was taking inventory. "Help you with something?" Rhett called out. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning. Name's Silas Grady. I'm looking for my wife." Rhett's grip tightened on the rifle. "Don't know anyone by that name." "Didn't give you her name yet," Silas said, still smiling. "But I'll describe her for you. About this tall, dark hair, green eyes, pretty thing, goes by Ophelia." "Still don't know her?" Silas tilted his head. "That's funny, because I heard she might be here. Word travels fast in small towns, Mr. Callahan." Rhett didn't move. "You heard wrong." "Maybe." Silas leaned forward in his saddle. "Or maybe you're lying. Either way, I'm going to need to look around, just to be sure." "Not happening." The smile finally left Silas's face. "I don't think you understand. She's my wife. That means she's my property, and if you're hiding her, that makes you a thief." "Get off my land," Rhett said, his voice low and hard. Silas stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. "You got guts. I'll give you that. But guts don't mean much when you're outnumbered." He glanced at the two men flanking him. "We'll be back, and next time we won't ask nicely." He turned his horse and rode off, his men following behind. Rhett didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Dutch came up beside him. "That's bad." "Yeah." "What are you going to do?" Rhett looked at the empty road. "Whatever I have to." Inside the house, Ophelia was standing in the kitchen, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. Rosa stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. "Was it him?" Ophelia asked. Rhett nodded. She closed her eyes. "I have to leave. Now." "No." "Rhett, you don't understand." "I understand plenty," Rhett said, setting the rifle down. "He's not taking you. Not today. Not ever. He has men with him. He'll come back with more. Let him." Ophelia shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I won't let you die for me." "Then don't," Rhett said. "Help me fight." She stared at him, her breath hitching. "How?" "By not running. By standing your ground. By trusting me." Ophelia looked at Rosa, who nodded slowly. Then she looked back at Rhett. "Okay, good." Rhett turned to Dutch, who was standing in the doorway. "Get the men together. Tell them what's happening. Anyone who doesn't want to be part of this can leave now. No hard feelings." Dutch nodded and walked out. Rhett looked at Ophelia. "You know how to shoot?" "A little." "Good enough." He pulled a pistol from the drawer and handed it to her. "You stay in this house. You don't come out unless I tell you to. And if anyone other than me or Dutch tries to get in, you pull that trigger. Understood?" Ophelia took the gun, her hands shaking. "Yes." Rhett turned to leave, but she grabbed his arm. "Rhett," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "Don't thank me yet." By noon, the ranch was ready. The men had gathered in the barn, Dutch, Cole, and 3 others. Rhett stood in front of them, his rifle leaning against the wall behind him. "I'm not going to lie to you," Rhett said. "This is bad. The man who came here today is looking for Ophelia. He says she's his wife. He says she belongs to him. And he's coming back with more men to take her." Cole shifted uncomfortably. "So what do we do?" "We stop him." "How?" "However we have to." One of the other men, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, spat into the dirt. "You asking us to die for a girl we barely know?" "No," Rhett said. "I'm asking you to stand your ground. This is our land, our home, and I'm not letting some bastard walk in here and take what's mine." "She yours now?" Frank asked, raising an eyebrow. Rhett's jaw tightened. "She's under my protection. That makes her mine. You got a problem with that?" Frank stared at him for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "Nope. Just wanted to be clear. Dutch stepped forward. We're with you, boss. All of us. Rhett looked at each of them in turn. Good. Now here's the plan. Bossing. They didn't have to wait long. Silas came back that evening, just as the sun was starting to set. But this time, he had more men. 7 in total, all of them armed. Rhett was standing on the porch when they rode up. Dutch was beside him, and the other men were spread out across the property, hidden but ready. Silas stopped at the gate again, but this time he didn't smile. Last chance, Callahan. Send her out, and we leave. No one gets hurt. Already told you, Rhett said. She's not here. Silas's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be the first time. Silas turned to his men. Search the place. 2 of them dismounted and started toward the barn. Dutch raised his rifle. Take another step and I'll drop you where you stand, Dutch said. The men stopped. Silas looked at Rhett, his expression cold. You really want to do this? Do I look like I'm joking? Silas stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Fine. We'll do it the hard way. He pulled his gun. Everything happened at once. Rhett dove off the porch as Silas fired, the bullet splintering the wood where he'd been standing. Dutch returned fire, hitting one of the men in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. The other men scattered, some heading for the barn, others toward the house. Rhett rolled to his feet and fired, hitting one of the riders in the leg. The man screamed and fell from his horse. Get to the house, Rhett shouted. Dutch ran toward the front door while Rhett laid down covering fire. 2 of Silas's men were trying to flank them from the side, but Frank and Cole came out from behind the barn and drove them back. Silas was still mounted, firing wildly, his face twisted with rage. She's mine, he screamed. You hear me? She's mine. Rhett ducked behind the water trough and reloaded. His hands were steady, his mind clear. He'd been in fights before. This wasn't new, but the stakes had never been this high. He glanced toward the house. Ophelia was at the window, her face pale, the pistol clutched in her hands. Their eyes met for a split second, and then she disappeared. Rhett swore under his breath and stood up, firing at Silas. The shot missed, but it was close enough to make Silas's horse rear. Fall back, Silas shouted to his men. Fall back! They retreated to the gate, regrouping. One of them was bleeding badly, another was limping, but they weren't done yet. Rhett stayed behind the trough, breathing hard. Dutch came running out of the house, crouched low. They're going to try again, Dutch said. I know. What do we do? Rhett looked at the men gathered at the gate. Then he looked back at the house. We end this. Back. Inside the house, Ophelia was trying not to panic. She could hear the gunfire outside, the shouting, the chaos. Rosa was crouched beside her, gripping her hand so tight it hurt. Stay down, Rosa whispered. Just stay down. But Ophelia couldn't. She crawled to the window and looked out. Rhett was behind the water trough, reloading his rifle. He looked tired, angry, but he wasn't backing down. And then she saw Silas. He was dismounting, pulling a rifle from his saddle, and heading toward the barn. He wasn't going for Rhett. He was going around. Ophelia's breath caught. He's trying to get inside. Rosa grabbed her arm. Don't! But Ophelia was already moving. She grabbed the pistol and ran toward the back door. Rosa shouted after her, but she didn't stop. Outside, the air was thick with smoke and dust. She could hear Silas's boots crunching on the gravel as he moved toward the barn. She stayed low, circling around the side of the house, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She reached the barn just as Silas stepped inside. Ophelia followed, the pistol raised. Silas was standing in the middle of the barn, looking around. He hadn't seen her yet. Looking for me? She said. He spun around and his face twisted into something ugly. There you are. Stay back, Ophelia said, her voice shaking. Silas laughed. You're going to shoot me, Ophelia. You don't have the guts. Try me. He took a step forward, then another. Ophelia pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, hitting the wall beside him. Silas flinched, but then he smiled. Told you, no guts. He lunged. Ophelia tried to fire again, but he was too fast. He grabbed her wrist and twisted, and the gun fell from her hand. She screamed and tried to pull away, but he was stronger. You think you can run from me? Silas hissed, his face inches from hers. You think you can just leave? Let go of me. You're mine, Ophelia. You've always been mine. and then Phantom screamed. The stallion came out of nowhere, charging from the back of the barn, his hooves thundering against the ground. Silas barely had time to turn before Phantom slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Ophelia scrambled back, her breath coming in gasps. Silas tried to get up, but Phantom reared, his hooves crashing down inches from Silas's head. The man rolled away, swearing, trying to reach for his gun. But then Rhett was there. He tackled Silas before he could grab the weapon, and the two of them went down in a tangle of fists and fury. Rhett landed a punch to Silas's jaw, then another, and Silas's head snapped back. "Stay down," Rhett growled. Silas spat blood. "She's mine." "Not anymore." Rhett hit him again, and this time Silas didn't get up. Rhett stood, breathing hard, and looked at Ophelia. "You okay?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm okay." Phantom was standing between them and Silas, his ears pinned back, his body tense. Rhett reached out and placed a hand on the horse's neck. "Good boy," he said quietly. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Dutch appeared in the doorway, his rifle lowered. "It's over. They're running." Rhett nodded. He walked over to Ophelia and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, shaking, and he held her tight. "It's over," he said. "You're safe." Ophelia buried her face in his chest and finally let herself cry. The sheriff arrived the next morning with 2 deputies. Silas was tied up in the barn, bruised and furious. His men had scattered, most of them wounded, none of them willing to stick around. The sheriff, a heavy-set man named Taggart, looked around at the damage, bullet holes in the porch, broken fence posts, blood in the dirt, and shook his head. "Hell of a mess, Rhett." "Yeah." "You want to tell me what happened?" Rhett gestured toward Silas. "He came here looking for his wife, tried to take her by force. We stopped him." Taggart walked over to Silas and looked him up and down. "That true?" Silas glared at him. "She's my wife. I have a right—" "You don't have a right to jack shit," Taggart said flatly. He turned to Rhett. "Where's the woman now?" "Inside." Taggart nodded and walked toward the house. Rhett followed. Ophelia was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea Rosa had made for her. She looked up when the sheriff walked in, and her face went pale. "Don't worry," Taggart said, holding up a hand. "I'm not here to take you anywhere. I just need to hear your side." Ophelia glanced at Rhett, and he nodded. She took a shaky breath and told the sheriff everything. About Silas, about the abuse, about running, about arriving at the ranch and what had happened the night before. Taggart listened without interrupting. When she was done, he sighed and took off his hat. "You got proof of any of this?" Ophelia pulled back her sleeve, showing the old scars on her arms. "Is this enough?" Taggart's jaw tightened. "Yeah, that's enough." He stood. "I'll take him in. Run his name through the wires. If what you're saying is true, he'll hang." "What if it's not enough?" Ophelia asked quietly. "Then we'll make it enough," Taggart said. He looked at Rhett. "You did good here, Rhett. Not many men would have stood up like that." Rhett didn't say anything. He just nodded. Taggart put his hat back on and walked out. A few minutes later, they heard the sound of horses riding away. Ophelia let out a long, shaky breath. "It's really over?" Rhett sat down beside her. "Yeah, it's over." She looked at him, her eyes red and tired. "What happens now?" "Now," Rhett said, "you get to decide." "Decide what?" "Whether you stay or go." Ophelia stared at him. "You want me to stay?" Rhett met her gaze, and for the first time he didn't look away. "Yeah, I do." She didn't say anything. She just reached out and took his hand. And for the first time in years, Rhett Callahan didn't feel alone. The days after Silas was taken away were strange, quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what came next. Ophelia spent most of the first day in her room, not hiding exactly, just processing. Rhett didn't push her. He went about his work, fixed the bullet holes in the porch, and tried not to think too hard about what he'd said to her in the kitchen. He'd told her he wanted her to stay. He'd meant it. But now, in the cold light of morning, he wasn't sure what that meant. For either of them. Rosa found him on this porch that afternoon, hammering a new board into place. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching him work. "You gonna talk to her?" Rosa asked. "About what?" "Don't play dumb, Rhett. You know what? Rhett drove another nail into the wood, harder than necessary. She needs time. She needs to know where she stands. She knows. Does she? Rosa stepped closer. Because from where I'm standing, you told her you wanted her to stay, and then you've spent the last 24 hours avoiding her. Rhett set the hammer down. I'm not avoiding her. Then what are you doing? Giving her space. Rosa shook her head. You're scared. I'm not. Yes, you are. You're scared that if you get too close, you'll lose her. Just like you lost them. Rosa's voice softened. But Rhett, you can't live like that forever. You can't keep everyone at arm's length just because you're afraid of what might happen. Rhett didn't answer. He picked up the hammer and went back to work. Rosa sighed and walked back inside. That evening, Ophelia came out of her room. She found Rhett in the barn feeding the horses. He looked up when she walked in, and for a second neither of them said anything. You okay? He asked finally. I think so. She walked over to Phantom's stall and ran her hand along the horse's neck. I keep waiting for it to feel real, like he's really gone. But it doesn't. It will, eventually. Ophelia looked at him. How long did it take you? Rhett frowned. What do you mean? When you lost your family. How long did it take for it to feel real? Rhett set the bucket of grain down and leaned against the stall door. A long time. Too long, maybe. Does it still hurt? Yeah, but it's different now. Less sharp, more dull. Ophelia nodded. I think that's what scares me. The idea that I'll just get used to it, that it'll stop hurting and I'll forget what it felt like to be afraid. You won't forget, Rhett said. Trust me. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what to do now. What do you mean? I don't know where to go, what to do. I've spent so long just surviving that I don't know how to do anything else. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You could stay here. Ophelia looked up at him. You mean that? Yeah. Why? Rhett met her gaze. Because I like having you here. Because you're good with the horses. Because Rosa would kill me if I let you leave. He paused. And because I think maybe you need a place to figure out who you are now. Without him. Ophelia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Rhett stepped closer. Ophelia, you saved that horse. You stood up to Silas. You didn't run when things got bad. You're not a burden. You're something else. What? Rhett hesitated. Then he said, Someone worth keeping around. Ophelia stared at him, and for a long moment, the only sound was the soft shuffle of the horses in their stalls. Okay, she said finally. I'll stay. Rhett nodded, trying to ignore the relief that washed over him. Good. Ophelia smiled just a little. But I'm paying my way. I'm not just living here for free. Didn't think you would. And I'm training more horses, not just Phantom. Deal. Ophelia held out her hand and Rhett shook it, but neither of them let go right away. Good. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, everyone in town knew what had happened at the Callahan Ranch. The story grew with each telling. Silas had brought 12 men. Rhett had fought them off single-handedly. Ophelia had shot 3 of them herself. None of it was true, but people loved a good story. The first time Rhett went into town after the fight, he felt the weight of every eye on him. People stared, whispered. Some nodded in approval. Others looked at him like he'd lost his mind. He was at the general store picking up supplies when the owner, a wiry man named Miller, leaned over the counter. Heard you had some trouble out at your place, Miller said. Word travels, Rhett said flatly. That girl still with you? Yeah, Miller nodded slowly. People are talking, you know. Let them. I'm just saying, Rhett, you might want to be careful. There are folks who think you're making a mistake. Rhett set a bag of flour on the counter. And what do you think? Miller shrugged. I think a man's got a right to do what he wants on his own land, but that don't mean everyone's going to agree with you. Rhett paid for the supplies and walked out without another word. Outside, he ran into Sheriff Taggart, who was leaning against a post chewing tobacco. Rhett, Taggart said, nodding. Sheriff, Taggart spat into the dirt. Got some news for you. Ran Silas Grady's name through the wires like I said I would. Rhett stopped. And? Turns out he's wanted in 3 states. Assault, theft, fraud, even killed a man in a bar fight 5 years ago. Taggart looked at Rhett. That woman of yours? She's lucky she got out when she did. Rhett's jaw tightened. What happens to him now? He'll hang or rot in prison. Either way, he's not coming back. Rhett nodded. Good. Taggart studied him for a moment. You planning to marry her? Rhett blinked. What? The girl, Ophelia. You planning to marry her? Rhett stopped. That's none of your business. Taggart grinned. Fair enough, but if you're going to keep her around, people are going to expect it, just so you know. He tipped his hat and walked off, leaving Rhett standing in the middle of the street, feeling like he'd just been punched in the gut. When Rhett got back to the ranch, Ophelia was in the corral with Phantom, working him through a series of turns. She'd tied her hair back and her sleeves were rolled up, and she looked different, stronger, more herself. Rhett stood by the fence, watching. After a while, she noticed him and brought the horse over. How was town? She asked. Fine. People staring? Yeah. Ophelia smiled faintly. Get used to it. We're the talk of the county now. Apparently. She tilted her head. Does it bother you? Not really. Does it bother you? No. She patted Phantom's neck. I've been talked about before. At least this time, I'm not ashamed. Rhett looked at her, and something in his chest tightened. Taggart says Silas is wanted in 3 states. He's not getting out. Ophelia's expression didn't change. Good. You okay? Yeah. She paused. I think I am. Rhett nodded. He wanted to say more, but he didn't know how. So he just stood there, awkward and silent, until Ophelia laughed. What? He asked. You. You look like you swallowed a bee. I don't. Yes, you do. She smiled. What's going on? Rhett rubbed the back of his neck. Taggart asked if I was planning to marry you. Ophelia's smile faded. Oh. Yeah. What did you say? I told him it was none of his business. Ophelia looked down. Right. Of course. Rhett frowned. I didn't mean, it's fine, Rhett. Really. But it wasn't fine. He could see it in the way she wouldn't look at him, in the way her shoulders tensed. Ophelia, I should get Phantom back to the barn, she said quickly. It's getting late. She led the horse away before Rhett could say anything else. He stood there, alone by the fence, and cursed himself for being an idiot. Look, that night, Rhett couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in his head. He'd said the wrong thing. He knew he had. But he didn't know how to fix it. Finally, he got up, pulled on his boots, and walked out onto the porch. Ophelia was already there. She was sitting on the steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the dark prairie. She looked up when he sat down beside her. Can't sleep? She asked. No. You? No. They sat in silence for a while. Then Rhett said, I'm sorry. Ophelia looked at him. For what? For earlier. For what I said. Or didn't say. I don't know. Ophelia shook her head. You don't owe me an apology. Yes, I do. Why? Because I hurt you. I could see it. Ophelia pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. It's not your fault, Rhett. You don't owe me anything. You've already done more for me than anyone ever has. That's not the point. Then what is? Rhett looked at her, and for the first time he let himself say what he'd been thinking for weeks. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Caring about someone. Letting them close. I haven't done it in so long, I don't know if I remember how. Ophelia's expression softened. You're doing fine. I'm not. I'm terrible at it. No, you're not. She reached out and took his hand. You saved my life, Rhett. You gave me a place to stay. You stood up to Silas when no one else would. You're doing better than you think. Rhett looked down at their hands. I meant what I said, about wanting you to stay. I know. And when Taggart asked if I was planning to marry you, I didn't say no because I don't want to. I said it because I didn't know if you'd want that. Ophelia's breath caught. What? Rhett looked up, meeting her eyes. I'm not good at this. I'm broken, Ophelia. I'm angry and stubborn, and half the time I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I don't want you to leave. And if that means marrying you, then I'd do it, if you wanted. Ophelia stared at him, her eyes wide. Rhett? You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know. Ophelia shook her head, and for a second Rhett thought he'd ruined everything. But then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made his chest ache. You really are terrible at this, she said. Rhett let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, I know. Ophelia leaned her head against his shoulder. But I'm not much better. They sat there together, wrapped in the quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Rhett felt like maybe he wasn't drowning anymore. The next morning, Dutch pulled Rhett aside. We got a problem, Dutch said. Rhett sighed. What now? Some of the men are leaving. Rhett frowned. Why? They're scared. After what happened with Silas, they think more trouble's coming. They don't want to stick around and find out. Rhett rubbed his face. How many? 3. Maybe 4. Damn it! Dutch shrugged. Can't say I blame them. It's been a rough few weeks. You leaving too? Hell no! Dutch grinned. This is the most excitement I've had in years. Rhett shook his head. You're crazy. Maybe, but so are you. Rhett couldn't argue with that. Later that afternoon, the men who were leaving packed their things and rode out. Rhett watched them go, feeling the weight of what was happening settle on his shoulders. The ranch was smaller now, quieter, but it was still standing, and so was he. Over the next few weeks, Ophelia threw herself into work. She trained Phantom every day, pushing him further, teaching him to trust. And it worked. The horse that had been wild and untouchable was now calm under her hand, obedient, even gentle. She started working with the other horses too, a mare that wouldn't take a saddle, a gelding that spooked at shadows. One by one, she broke through their fear, and one by one, they came around. The remaining men on the ranch started to respect her, not because Rhett told them to, but because she earned it. Cole, who had been skeptical from the start, came up to her one afternoon while she was working with the mare. You're good at this, he said. Ophelia looked up, surprised. Thanks. I mean it. I've seen a lot of horse trainers, but you're different. You don't force them. You just wait. Ophelia smiled. Forcing doesn't work, not with horses, not with people. Cole nodded slowly. I'm sorry for what I said before about you being trouble. It's okay. No, it's not. You're not trouble. You're... He paused, searching for the word. You're good for this place. For him. Ophelia glanced toward the house where Rhett was fixing a section of fence. You think so? I know so. Cole tipped his hat. Anyway, just wanted to say that. He walked off, and Ophelia stood there, feeling something warm settle in her chest. Maybe she did belong here. That night, Rhett and Ophelia ate dinner with Rosa, and for the first time it felt normal, like they were a family. Rosa served stew, and they ate in comfortable silence. When they were done, Rosa stood and started clearing the plates. Leave them, Rhett said. I'll do it. Rosa raised an eyebrow. You feeling okay? I'm fine. Rosa looked at Ophelia, who shrugged. Don't look at me. I don't know what's gotten into him. Rosa laughed and left the kitchen, shaking her head. Rhett and Ophelia washed the dishes together, side by side, not talking much. But it didn't feel awkward. It felt easy. When they were done, Ophelia dried her hands and turned to him. Rhett? Yeah? Thank you for everything. Rhett looked at her, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You don't have to keep thanking me, he said softly. I know, but I want to. They stood there close enough that Rhett could feel the warmth of her, and for the first time he let himself think about what it would be like to kiss her. But he didn't, not yet. Instead, he stepped back and cleared his throat. Get some sleep. We've got an early start tomorrow. Ophelia nodded, and Rhett walked out onto the porch, his heart pounding in his chest. He was falling for her, and he didn't know what to do about it. A few days later, a letter arrived. Rhett was in the barn when Dutch brought it to him. "This came for you, from the sheriff." Rhett took the letter and opened it. It was short, just a few lines. Silas Grady was dead. He'd been killed in a prison fight 3 days after he arrived. Rhett folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "What's it say?" Dutch asked. "Silas is dead." Dutch's eyebrows went up. "Damn." "Yeah." "You gonna tell her?" Rhett nodded. "Yeah. She deserves to know." He found Ophelia in the corral, brushing Phantom. She looked up when he walked over, and her smile faded when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. Rhett handed her the letter. Ophelia read it, her face going pale. Then she folded it carefully and handed it back. "He's really gone," she said quietly. "Yeah." Ophelia looked down at her hands. "I thought I'd feel different. Relieved, maybe. Or happy. But I just feel empty." Rhett stepped closer. "That's normal." "Is it?" "Yeah, it takes time." Ophelia nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Rhett reached out and took her hand. "You're free now, Ophelia. You can go anywhere. Do anything. You don't have to run anymore." Ophelia looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "What if I don't want to go anywhere?" Rhett's chest tightened. "Then don't." "What if I want to stay here, with you?" Rhett didn't answer. He just pulled her into his arms and held her, and Ophelia buried her face in his chest and finally let herself cry. They stood there for a long time, wrapped up in each other, and when Ophelia finally pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "I'm staying," she said. Rhett nodded. "Good." Sit. The next few weeks were some of the best Rhett had had in years. Ophelia settled into life on the ranch like she'd always been there. She worked with the horses, helped Rosa in the kitchen, and sat with Rhett on the porch every evening, watching the sun go down. And slowly, carefully, they started to let their guards down. Rhett told her about his wife and daughter, about how they'd died, and how he'd blamed himself for not being able to save them. Ophelia told him about her life before Silas, about her parents, who had died when she was young, about the loneliness that had driven her into a marriage she should never have agreed to. They talked about the things that had broken them, and in doing so they started to heal. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Ophelia leaned her head on Rhett's shoulder. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked. "Sometimes." "Why?" "I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to figure out what mine looks like now." Rhett looked down at her. "What do you want it to look like?" Ophelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want it to look like this, sitting here with you, working with the horses, being somewhere I don't have to be afraid." Rhett's hand found hers, and he laced their fingers together. "Then that's what it'll be." Ophelia looked up at him, and this time Rhett didn't pull away. He leaned down and kissed her. It was soft, tentative, like neither of them was sure if it was the right thing to do. But when Ophelia kissed him back, Rhett knew it was. When they finally pulled apart, Ophelia was smiling. "Took you long enough?" Rhett laughed. "Yeah, I know." They sat there together, hands clasped, and for the first time in years, Rhett felt like he had something worth holding on to. Bumcheck. A few days later, Rhett rode into town. He had a plan, and he needed to see it through before he lost his nerve. He went to the jeweler first. It was a small shop tucked between the general store and the blacksmith, and Rhett had never set foot inside. The jeweler, an old man with spectacles, looked up when Rhett walked in. "Help you with something?" "I need a ring," Rhett said. The jeweler smiled. "For the girl everyone's talking about?" Rhett frowned. "Does everyone in this town know my business?" "Pretty much." The jeweler pulled out a tray of rings. "What kind are you looking for?" Rhett looked at the rings, feeling completely out of his depth. They were all too fancy, too delicate. Ophelia wasn't like that. "Something simple," Rhett said. "Nothing too flashy." The jeweler nodded and pulled out a plain silver band with a small stone. "This one?" Rhett picked it up. It was understated, elegant in its simplicity. It felt right. "I'll take it," he said. The jeweler wrapped it up, and Rhett paid and walked out, his heart pounding. He had no idea what he was doing, but he was doing it anyway. That night, Rhett stood on the porch, the ring in his pocket, trying to figure out how to do this. Ophelia was in the barn, finishing up with the horses. Rhett walked over, his hands shaking slightly, and found her closing Phantom's stall. "Hey," he said. She looked up and smiled. "Hey." Rhett cleared his throat. "You got a minute?" "Sure." They walked outside and Rhett led her over to the corral fence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What's going on?" Ophelia asked. Rhett turned to face her. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About us. About the future." Ophelia's expression grew serious. "Okay." Rhett reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. Ophelia's eyes widened. "I know I'm not good at this," Rhett said, "and I know I'm probably doing it all wrong. But I don't care, Ophelia. You've changed my life. You've made me feel things I thought I'd never feel again, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Ophelia's hand flew to her mouth. "So," Rhett continued, "if you'll have me, I'd like to marry you. Not because people expect it, not because it's the right thing to do, but because I love you." Tears spilled down Ophelia's cheeks. "You love me?" "Yeah, I do." Ophelia laughed, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "I love you too." Rhett grinned. "So is that a yes?" "Yes, yes, it's a yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him hard. When they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing. "We're really doing this?" Ophelia asked. "Yeah," Rhett said. "We really are." The news spread through town faster than wildfire. Rhett Callahan, the man who'd spent years hiding from the world, was getting married. And not to some rancher's daughter or a woman from a respectable family. To the runaway he'd taken in, the one who'd brought trouble to his doorstep. Some people were happy for him. Most weren't. Rhett didn't care. He and Ophelia decided to keep the wedding small. Just Rosa, Dutch, and a few of the ranch hands. They'd get married on the property, under the open sky, the way it should be. No church, no crowd, no pretense. Rosa was thrilled. She spent the next week cooking, cleaning, and fussing over Ophelia like she was her own daughter. She even pulled out an old dress from a trunk in the attic, simple, white, with lace at the collar. "It was mine," Rosa said, holding it up. "From a long time ago. You can have it if you want." Ophelia's eyes filled with tears. "Rosa, I can't." "Yes, you can. It's just sitting in a trunk. Might as well get some use out of it." Ophelia took the dress and held it against herself. It fit perfectly. "Thank you," she whispered. Rosa smiled and patted her cheek. "You're welcome, child." The days leading up to the wedding were strange for Rhett. He felt lighter somehow, like a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally lifted. But he also felt vulnerable, exposed, like he'd opened a door he couldn't close again. Dutch noticed it one morning while they were repairing a section of fence. "You nervous?" Dutch asked. "About what?" "Getting married." Rhett hammered a nail into the post. "A little. That's normal." "Is it?" "Hell yeah, I was terrified when I got married. Spent the whole morning convinced she'd change her mind." Rhett glanced at him. "I didn't know you were married." "Was. Long time ago. She passed." "I'm sorry," Dutch shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but I remember how I felt. Like I was about to jump off a cliff and hope there was water at the bottom." Rhett set the hammer down. "That's exactly how I feel." "Then you're doing it right." Dutch grinned. "It's supposed to be terrifying. That's how you know it matters." Rhett nodded, feeling a little better. That night he found Ophelia sitting on the porch, staring out at the stars. He sat down beside her, and for a while they didn't say anything. "You okay?" Rhett asked finally. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Ophelia looked at him. "About how different my life is now. A few months ago, I was running for my life, and now I'm here, with you, about to get married." She shook her head. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real," Rhett said. "I know, but sometimes I'm afraid I'm going to wake up and it'll all be gone." Rhett reached out and took her hand. "It's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere." Ophelia smiled, but there was something sad in it. "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." "Rhett?" "I know life doesn't come with guarantees," Rhett said. "I know things can go wrong. But I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you, and I'm not backing out." Ophelia's eyes shimmered with tears. I'm choosing you too. They sat there together, hands clasped, and the weight of what they were about to do settled over them like a blanket. It wasn't fear exactly. It was responsibility, commitment, the knowledge that they were tying their lives together and there was no going back, but neither of them wanted to go back. The morning of the wedding, Rhett woke up before dawn. He couldn't sleep. His mind was racing, his heart pounding. He got dressed, went outside, and walked out to the corral where Phantom was standing, his dark coat gleaming in the early light. Big day, Rhett said quietly. The horse snorted and tossed his head. Rhett leaned against the fence. You think I'm doing the right thing? Phantom just stared at him, unimpressed. Rhett laughed. Yeah, that's what I thought. He stood there for a while, watching the sun come up, and when he finally turned to go back inside, he felt calmer, ready. Inside, Rosa was already up, bustling around the kitchen. She looked at him and smiled. You look like you're about to face a firing squad, she said. I feel like it. Rosa laughed. Relax. You're marrying a good woman. You'll be fine. Yeah, I know. Rosa handed him a cup of coffee. Drink this, and then go get cleaned up. You're not getting married looking like that. Rhett looked down at himself. He was covered in dust and horsehair. Right, good point. He went to his room, washed up, and put on the cleanest shirt he owned. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. When he came back out, Rosa nodded approvingly. Better? Thanks. Rosa hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. I'm proud of you, Rhett. You've come a long way. Rhett hugged her back, feeling a lump form in his throat. Thanks, Rosa. She pulled back and wiped her eyes. Now go. Ophelia's almost ready. Well, the ceremony was set for noon. They gathered in the yard under a makeshift arch that Dutch had built out of old fence posts and wildflowers. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Rhett stood at the front, his hands shaking slightly, waiting. Dutch stood beside him, grinning like an idiot. You good? Dutch asked. Yeah, I think so. You don't look good. Thanks. Dutch laughed. Relax, she's not going to run. Rhett opened his mouth to respond, but then he saw her. Ophelia stepped out of the house, wearing Rosa's dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, not in a polished, perfect way, but in a way that was real, human, hers. Rhett forgot how to breathe. Ophelia walked toward him, her eyes locked on his, and when she reached him, she smiled. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Rhett said, his voice rough. Dutch cleared his throat. You two ready? They nodded. Dutch wasn't a preacher, but he'd agreed to officiate. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and squinted at it. Okay, so, marriage. He paused. Marriage is, well, it's a lot of things. It's commitment. It's trust. It's choosing to stand beside someone even when things get hard. Which they will, because life's hard. He looked up at them. But if you're standing beside the right person, it's worth it. Rhett glanced at Ophelia, and she squeezed his hand. Dutch continued. Rhett, do you take Ophelia to be your wife? To stand by her, support her, and love her, even when she drives you crazy? Rhett smiled. I do. Ophelia, do you take Rhett to be your husband? To stand by him, support him, and love him, even when he's stubborn as hell? Ophelia laughed. I do. Dutch grinned. Then by the power vested in me by absolutely no one, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Rhett, you can kiss her. Rhett didn't need to be told twice. He cupped Ophelia's face in his hands and kissed her, and the small crowd cheered. When they pulled apart, Ophelia was smiling so wide it looked like it hurt. We did it, she said. Yeah, Rhett said. We did. The celebration was simple. Rosa had made a cake, Dutch had brought out a bottle of whiskey, and they all sat around the yard eating and drinking and laughing. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive. Cole came up to Rhett at one point holding a glass. Congratulations, boss. Thanks. She's good for you, you know. Rhett looked over at Ophelia, who was laughing at something Rosa had said. Yeah, I know. Cole hesitated, then said, I'm sorry for doubting her. For doubting you. Rhett clapped him on the shoulder. It's fine. You were just looking out for the place. Cole nodded and walked off, and Rhett stood there, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the sun had set, Rhett and Ophelia sat on the porch together. Ophelia was still wearing the dress, and Rhett had his arm around her. "What are you thinking about?" Ophelia asked. "About how different things are now." "Good different or bad different?" "Good." Rhett looked at her. "Really good." Ophelia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you." "I love you too." They sat there in the quiet, and for the first time in years, Rhett felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Rhett's life. Ophelia continued working with the horses, and word of her skills spread. People started bringing their horses to the ranch, paying her to train them. It wasn't much at first, but it grew. Soon she had more work than she could handle. Rhett watched her thrive, and it filled him with a pride he didn't know how to name. One afternoon, he found her in the corral with a young mare that had been abused by its previous owner. The horse was skittish, violent, lashing out at anyone who came near. But Ophelia didn't give up. She spent hours with the mare, just standing there, letting the horse get used to her presence. And slowly, over weeks, the mare started to trust her. Rhett stood by the fence, watching, and Dutch came up beside him. "She's something, isn't she?" Dutch said. "Yeah." "You ever think about what would have happened if she hadn't shown up here?" Rhett thought about it, about the empty, silent days, the loneliness, the slow suffocation of living without really being alive. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think about it." And I'm glad she did." Dutch nodded. "Me too." But life on the frontier was never easy for long. That winter, a harsh cold snap hit the territory. The temperature dropped so low that the water in the troughs froze solid, and the animals huddled together for warmth. Rhett and Ophelia worked around the clock, trying to keep the livestock alive. They broke ice, hauled hay, and stayed up through the night, making sure nothing died. It was exhausting, brutal. But they did it together. One night, after a particularly long day, Rhett found Ophelia sitting by the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked exhausted. He sat down beside her. "You okay?" "I'm tired." "Yeah, me too." Ophelia looked at him. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me?" Rhett frowned. "What? No, why would you ask that?" "Because this is hard, and I know I've made your life harder." "Ophelia, I've brought trouble, I've brought work, Stop. Rhett took her hand. "You haven't made my life harder. You've made it better. Before you showed up, I was just existing. I wasn't living, but you changed that. You made me care again. You made me feel again." He paused. "So no, I don't regret it. Not for a second." Ophelia's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, I'm scared sometimes." "Of what?" "That I'm not enough. That I'll fail you." Rhett pulled her close. "You're more than enough, and you're not failing anyone." Ophelia buried her face in his chest, and Rhett held her, feeling the weight of her fear and exhaustion. "We're going to get through this," he said quietly. "Together." "I know," Ophelia whispered. "I know." The cold snap finally broke in late January, and with it came a thaw. The snow melted, the ice cracked, and the world slowly came back to life. Rhett and Ophelia had survived. But the winter had taken its toll. They'd lost a few animals, and some of the ranch hands had left, unable to handle the harsh conditions. The ranch was smaller now, leaner, but it was still standing. One morning, Rhett walked out to the corral and found Ophelia standing beside Phantom. The horse looked healthy, strong, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. "He looks good," Rhett said. "He's ready," Ophelia said. "For what?" "To be ridden by someone else." Rhett frowned. "You're selling him?" "No, I'm training someone to ride him." She looked at Rhett. "He's too good to just sit here. He needs to be out there, working." Rhett studied her. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." Over the next few weeks, Ophelia worked with a young rancher named Tom, teaching him how to handle Phantom. It wasn't easy. The horse was still temperamental, still unpredictable. But Ophelia was patient, and Tom was willing to learn. By the end of the month, Tom was riding Phantom across the prairie, and Ophelia stood beside Rhett, watching them go. "You did good," Rhett said. "Thanks." "How do you feel?" Ophelia thought about it. "Proud, and a little sad." "Why sad?" "Because he was mine. And now he's not." Rhett put his arm around her. "He'll always be yours. You're the one who saved him." Ophelia leaned into him. "Yeah, I guess you're right." They stood there together watching the horse and rider disappear over the hills, and Rhett realized something. Ophelia had spent so much of her life running, hiding, surviving, but now she was building something. She was creating a life. And so was he. Bossy. Spring came, and with it, new challenges. The ranch was growing again. Word of Ophelia's skill with horses had spread beyond the county, and people were coming from all over to have her train their animals. It was good for business, but it also meant more work. Rhett hired a few new hands, and together they expanded the corral and built a new barn. It wasn't easy, and there were days when Rhett wondered if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. But Ophelia never doubted. She worked harder than anyone, training horses during the day and helping Rhett with the ranch at night. She was tireless, driven, and Rhett couldn't help but admire her. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Rhett said, "You ever think about slowing down?" Ophelia laughed. "Why would I do that?" "Because you're working yourself to death." "I'm fine." Ophelia obeys. "Rhett, I'm happy. I'm doing something I love. Why would I slow down?" Rhett didn't have an answer for that, but he noticed something else. Ophelia was different now, stronger, more confident. The fear that had haunted her when she first arrived was gone. She walked with her head up, her shoulders back. She didn't flinch when people raised their voices. She didn't look over her shoulder anymore. She was free, and Rhett realized that he was too. For years he'd been trapped in his own grief, locked in a prison of his own making. But Ophelia had opened the door. She'd shown him that it was possible to live again, to love again, and he was grateful. Bamk. That summer, Ophelia found out she was pregnant. She told Rhett one evening after dinner, her hands shaking slightly as she placed them on her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she said. Rhett stared at her, his mind going blank. "What?" "I'm pregnant." Rhett's heart pounded in his chest. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Rosa confirmed it. Rhett stood up, ran his hands through his hair, and then sat back down. Okay. Ophelia looked at him, her expression uncertain. Are you happy?" Rhett looked at her, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'm happy." Ophelia smiled, and Rhett pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. A baby. They were having a baby. It terrified him. The thought of losing someone again, of something going wrong, of history repeating itself. But it also filled him with a hope he hadn't felt in years. "We're going to be okay," Ophelia whispered. "Yeah," Rhett said, his voice thick. "We are." The pregnancy was hard. Ophelia was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Rosa fussed over her constantly, making her rest, bringing her tea and broth. Rhett hovered like a worried ghost, afraid to let her out of his sight. "I'm fine," Ophelia said one afternoon, exasperated. "You don't have to watch me every second." "I'm not watching you." "Yes, you are." Rhett sighed. I'm worried." Ophelia's expression softened. "I know, but you can't live in fear, Rhett. It'll eat you alive." "I'm not afraid." "Yes, you are. And that's okay. But you can't let it control you." Rhett looked at her, and he realized she was right. He was afraid. Terrified, actually. But he couldn't let that fear dictate his life. So he took a breath, stepped back, and trusted that everything would be okay. And it was. By the time fall arrived, Ophelia's sickness had passed, and she was glowing. Her belly grew, and with it, the excitement on the ranch. Rosa knitted blankets, Dutch built a crib, and even the ranch hands started talking about the baby like it was already part of the family. One evening, Rhett and Ophelia sat on the porch watching the sunset. Ophelia's hand was on her belly, and Rhett's hand was on top of hers. "What do you think it'll be?" Ophelia asked. "A girl," Rhett said without hesitation. "Why?" Because I already lost one. I think I'm being given a second chance. Ophelia looked at him, her eyes shimmering. I think so too. They sat there in the quiet, feeling the baby move beneath their hands, and Rhett felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Mag. The baby came in early November during a cold snap that reminded Rhett of the winter they'd survived together. Ophelia went into labor in the middle of the night, and Rhett woke to find her gripping the bedpost, her face pale and sweating. It's time, she said. Rhett's heart stopped. Now? Yes, now. He ran to get Rosa, and together they helped Ophelia through the labor. It was long, painful, and terrifying. Rhett stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, even though he felt like he was going to pass out. And then, finally, the baby came. A girl. She was small, red-faced, and screaming at the top of her lungs. Rosa cleaned her up and placed her in Ophelia's arms, and Ophelia looked down at her with tears streaming down her face. She's perfect, Ophelia whispered. Rhett stared at the baby, his heart so full it hurt. Yeah, she is. They named her Clara, after Rhett's mother, and from that moment on, everything changed. The first few months were exhausting. Clara cried constantly, barely slept, and demanded all of Ophelia's attention. Rhett tried to help, but he felt useless most of the time. He didn't know how to hold her, how to soothe her, how to do anything right. But Ophelia was patient with him. Here, she said one night, handing Clara to him. Just hold her. She'll calm down. Rhett took the baby, his hands shaking. Clara squirmed and fussed, and Rhett was sure he was doing it wrong. But then Ophelia placed her hand on his, steadying him, and Clara settled. See, Ophelia said. You're doing fine. Rhett looked down at the tiny baby in his arms, and something inside him cracked open. He'd lost a daughter once. He'd thought he'd never have another chance. But here she was, alive, breathing, his. Thank you, he whispered. Ophelia looked at him. For what? For this? For her? For everything. Ophelia smiled and kissed him. You don't have to thank me. We did this together. As Clara grew, so did the ranch. Ophelia continued training horses, though she took on fewer clients now. Rhett expanded the property, buying more land, hiring more men. The ranch that had once been a place of silence and grief was now full of life. People came and went. Stories were told. Laughter echoed across the plains. And through it all, Rhett and Ophelia stood together. One evening, when Clara was almost 2 years old, Rhett found Ophelia sitting on the porch, watching their daughter play in the yard. Clara was chasing a butterfly, her laughter ringing out like music. Rhett sat down beside Ophelia. You happy? Ophelia looked at him and smiled. More than I ever thought I'd be. Me too. They sat there in comfortable silence, watching their daughter, and Rhett realized something. He'd spent so many years afraid of losing people, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of living. But Ophelia had taught him something important. Life was full of risk, of pain, of uncertainty, but it was also full of joy, of love, of second chances. And sometimes the only way to find those things was to stop running, to stand your ground, to let people in, even when it scared you. Rhett had done that. He'd taken a chance on a broken woman who'd collapsed beside his water trough, and in doing so, he'd saved himself. You ever think about that day? Ophelia asked, as if reading his mind. What day? The day I showed up here, half dead and covered in mud. Rhett laughed. Yeah, I think about it. What do you think? I think I almost made the biggest mistake of my life. Ophelia looked at him. What do you mean? I almost turned you away. I almost told you to leave. He shook his head. If I had, I don't know where I'd be right now. Probably dead inside. Definitely alone. Ophelia took his hand. But you didn't turn me away. No, I didn't. Why? Rhett thought about it. Because something told me not to. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. I don't know, but I'm glad I listened. Ophelia leaned her head on his shoulder. Me too. They sat there together, watching Clara chase butterflies, and Rhett felt something settle deep in his chest. This was his life now. This was his family. This was his home. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. Ophelia's reputation as a horse trainer spread far and wide. People came from across the territory to have her work with their animals. She never turned anyone away, no matter how difficult the horse or how broken the person bringing it in. Because she understood. She understood what it was like to be broken, to be afraid, to need someone to believe in you when no one else would. And she gave that to every horse she touched. Rhett watched her work, day after day, and he marveled at the woman she'd become. She wasn't the scared, desperate girl who'd collapsed beside his water trough. She was strong, confident, whole, but she was still vulnerable, still human, still capable of doubt and fear and pain, and Rhett loved her for it. One evening, as they sat on the porch, something they'd done thousands of times over the years, Rhett said, "You ever regret staying here?" Ophelia looked at him, surprised. "No, never. Why?" "I don't know. I just wonder sometimes if you ever think about what your life would have been like if you'd kept running, if you'd ended up somewhere else." Ophelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think about it sometimes, but not in a regretful way. More like, I'm grateful it didn't happen." "Why?" "Because if I'd kept running, I never would have stopped. I never would have healed. I never would have found this." She gestured to the ranch, to Clara playing in the yard, to Rhett sitting beside her. "I never would have found you." Rhett felt his throat tighten. "I'm glad you stopped running." "Me too." They sat there in the quiet, and Rhett thought about everything they'd been through. The fear, the violence, the pain, the joy, the love. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been perfect, but it had been real, and that was enough. Jess. Clara grew up strong and fearless, just like her mother. By the time she was 5, she was already helping Ophelia with the horses, feeding them, brushing them, talking to them in that same soft, steady voice Ophelia used. Rhett watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. She reminded him so much of Ophelia, brave, stubborn, impossible to intimidate. One afternoon, Clara came running up to him, her face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Mama says I can train a horse." Rhett looked over at Ophelia, who was grinning. "She's ready," Ophelia said. Rhett wasn't so sure. "She's 5. "So? I was younger than that when I started." "That's different." "How?" Rhett didn't have a good answer for that. Clara tugged on his sleeve. "Please, Papa, I promise I'll be careful." Rhett looked down at his daughter's bright, hopeful face, and he sighed. "Fine. But your mother's in charge, and if she says stop, you stop. Understood?" Clara nodded eagerly. "Understood." She ran back to the corral, and Rhett walked over to Ophelia. "You sure about this?" he asked. "She's my daughter," Ophelia said. "Of course I'm sure." Rhett shook his head, but he was smiling. "She's going to give me a heart attack." "Probably." Ophelia kissed him. "But she's going to be amazing." And she was. As Clara grew older, she became more and more like Ophelia. She had the same patience, the same intuition, the same gift for understanding broken things. But she also had Rhett's stubbornness, his determination, his refusal to back down. It was a dangerous combination. One day, when Clara was 10, she came home with a black eye. Rhett saw it immediately. "What happened?" Clara shrugged. "Some boy at school said Mama was trash, said she didn't belong here, so I hit him." Rhett stared at her. Then he looked at Ophelia, who was trying very hard not to smile. "Clara," Rhett said carefully, "you can't just hit people." "Why not? He deserved it." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Rhett didn't know what to say, because honestly, if someone had said that about Ophelia, he probably would have hit them too. Ophelia stepped in. "Clara, I appreciate you defending me, but violence isn't the answer." "Then what is?" "Words. Standing up for yourself without using your fists." Clara frowned. "But words don't always work." "No," Ophelia said. "They don't. But you try them first, and if they don't work, then you walk away." "And if they don't let you walk away?" Ophelia paused. Then she said, "Then you do what you have to do, but you make sure it's the last resort, not the first." Clara thought about it. Then she nodded. "Okay." Rhett and Ophelia exchanged a look, and Rhett couldn't help but smile. Their daughter was going to be just fine. The years continued to pass, and the ranch became a fixture in the territory. People knew the Callahans. They knew Rhett, the man who'd taken in a runaway and built a life with her. They knew Ophelia, the woman who could tame any horse, no matter how wild. And they knew Clara, the girl who was growing up to be just as fierce and fearless as her parents. But not everyone was kind. There were still people who whispered, who judged, who thought Ophelia didn't belong. Rhett didn't care, and neither did Ophelia. They'd built something real, something strong, and no amount of gossip could take that away from them. One evening, as Rhett and Ophelia sat on the porch, now a ritual that had lasted more than a decade, Rhett said, "You ever think about how far we've come?" Ophelia smiled. "All the time." "You happy?" "Yes. Are you?" Rhett looked at her, at the woman who'd changed his life, and he nodded. "Yeah, I am." They sat there in the quiet, watching the sun set over the prairie, and Rhett realized something. Life wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, full of challenges and pain, but it was also full of love, of joy, of moments like this where everything felt right. And that was more than he'd ever hoped for. Bosk. When Clara was 15, she started training horses on her own. She was good, better than good. She had a natural gift, just like her mother, and people started coming to the ranch specifically to have Clara work with their animals. Rhett watched his daughter with pride, but also with a sense of bittersweet recognition. She was growing up. Soon she'd be an adult, and eventually she'd leave. It was the natural order of things. But it still hurt. One evening, Rhett found Ophelia in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, staring at nothing. "You okay?" he asked. Ophelia looked up. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About Clara. About how fast she's growing up." Ophelia's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not ready for her to leave." Rhett sat down beside her. "Me neither." "Do you think we did okay? As parents?" Rhett thought about it. "I think we did the best we could, and I think she turned out pretty great." Ophelia smiled through her tears. "Yeah, she did." They sat there together, and Rhett put his arm around her. "We'll be okay," he said. "When she leaves, we'll still have each other." Ophelia leaned into him. "I know, but it's still hard." "Yeah, it is, Mom." When Clara turned 18, she announced that she was leaving to start her own ranch. It was in the next county over, a small plot of land that she'd saved up for. She was going to train horses, just like her mother, but she wanted to do it on her own. Rhett understood. He was proud of her, but it still felt like a piece of his heart was being torn out. The day she left, the whole family stood in the yard, watching her pack up her things. "You sure you have everything?" Ophelia asked for the 10th time. "Yes, Mama, I'm sure." "And you'll write?" "Every week. I promise." Ophelia hugged her tight, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mama." Clara turned to Rhett, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "You take care of yourself," Rhett said, his voice rough. "I will, Papa. And if you need anything, I know. I'll come home." Rhett pulled her into a hug, and Clara held on tight. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Rhett said. When they finally pulled apart, Clara climbed onto her horse and rode away. Rhett and Ophelia stood in the yard, watching her disappear over the hills, and Ophelia leaned into Rhett. "She's going to be okay," Ophelia said. "Yeah, she is." They stood there for a long time, and then they walked back inside, hand in hand. With Clara gone, the house felt emptier, but it wasn't a bad emptiness. It was just different. Rhett and Ophelia adjusted. They worked on the ranch, trained horses, and spent their evenings on the porch, just like always. And slowly, they realized something. They were still happy. Even without Clara there, even with the house quieter, they were still happy. Because they had each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Ophelia said, "Do you ever think about that first day? When I showed up here?" Rhett smiled. "Yeah, all the time." "What do you think would have happened if you turned me away?" Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I would have died. Not physically, but inside. I would have kept living, but I wouldn't have been alive. Ophelia took his hand. I'm glad you didn't turn me away. Me too. They sat there in the quiet, and Rhett thought about everything they'd built. The life they'd created. The love they'd shared. It hadn't been easy. There had been pain, fear, loss, but there had also been joy, hope, second chances. And Rhett realized something. Life wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about surviving it, about finding the people who made it worth surviving. And he'd found that in Ophelia. She'd been broken when she arrived. So had he. But together, they'd healed. And that was the greatest gift he'd ever received. Well, years passed, and Rhett and Ophelia grew old together. They spent their days working on the ranch, training horses, and watching the world change around them. Clara came to visit often, bringing her own family, a husband and 2 children who reminded Rhett of himself and Ophelia. The ranch continued to thrive, a testament to everything they'd built. And through it all, Rhett and Ophelia remained by each other's side. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, Rhett found Ophelia sitting on the porch, staring out at the sunset. He sat down beside her. What are you thinking about? Just everything? Everything? Yeah, our life. How we got here. How lucky I am. Rhett took her hand. I'm the lucky one. Ophelia smiled. We're both lucky. They sat there in the quiet, and Rhett thought about everything they'd been through. The fear, the pain, the joy, the love. It had been a long road. A hard road. But they'd walked it together, and that made all the difference. I love you, Rhett said. I love you too, Ophelia said. They sat there, hand in hand, watching the sun sink below the horizon, and Rhett realized something. This was enough, this life, this love, this moment. It was enough. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rhett closed his eyes and let himself feel it. The peace, the contentment, the gratitude. He'd spent so many years running from life, from pain, from loss, but Ophelia had taught him something important. You can't run forever. Eventually you have to stop. You have to stand your ground. You have to let yourself live, and when you do, you might just find that life is worth living after all. Rhett opened his eyes and looked at Ophelia, and he knew, without a doubt, that he'd made the right choice. He'd chosen to let her in. He'd chosen to love her. He'd chosen to build a life with her. And in doing so, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. He'd found himself.